Admiral Blur never considered himself a military genius, but as he hovered before the Galactic Council, his gelatinous form trembling with barely suppressed excitement, he was convinced he had stumbled upon the ideal strategy to conquer Earth without a single shot fired. Esteemed members of the Council, Blur announced, his voice modulator struggling to maintain a professional tone, I present to you Operation Wine and Dine. A perplexed murmur rippled through the assembled alien dignitaries. Several tentacles raised inquisitively, while others merely swayed with mild disappointment at yet another of Blur's presentations. Now, hear me out, Blur continued, motioning to his anxious scientific advisor, Pipsqueak, to advance to the next slide. Our reconnaissance has revealed that humans are particularly enamored with a fermented beverage they call wine. They celebrate with it, they gift it to one another. They even have entire ceremonies dedicated to its consumption. High Counselor Zix, a towering mantis-like being, clicked her mandibles skeptically. And this aids us in conquering Earth precisely how? Because, Blur paused dramatically, humans consider wine sacred. They store their finest vintages for decades. They construct entire rooms solely to house their collections. And most importantly, they would never suspect their precious wine might be compromised. Pipsqueak, a diminutive Dominion creature who resembled a chocolate chip cookie crossed with a stressed-out accountant, nervously adjusted his datapad. According to our research, humans imbibe approximately 24 billion liters of wine annually. If we were to introduce our latest mind control compound into their supply, we could have the entire species under our control within months, Blur concluded triumphantly. The council chamber erupted in excited chittering. Several members began rapidly shifting colors in approval, while others extended their sensory appendages in traditional gestures of appreciation. But surely, came a gravelly voice from the back, the humans would detect if we adulterated their wine. Blur's gelatinous form rippled with amusement. That's the ingenious part. Our scientists have developed a compound that's utterly undetectable to human senses. Pipsqueak, tell them about the test results. Pipsqueak cleared his throat, or what passed for one in his species. We've successfully replicated the precise molecular structure of what humans call tannins, natural compounds found in wine. Our mind control agent binds seamlessly with these molecules, rendering it impossible to detect through conventional means. And the best part, Blur could barely contain himself now, the compound becomes more potent the longer it ages, just like their cherished wines. The longer they cellar their expensive bottles, the more effective our control will become. High Counselor Zix's antennae twitched thoughtfully. I must concede, Admiral Blur, this plan displays unexpected competence. How soon can we begin? Our agents are already positioned on Earth, disguised as wine critics and vineyard workers. We can commence Operation Wine and Dine immediately. The council voted unanimously to approve the plan, though several members were already placing wagers on how spectacularly it would fail. After all, this was Blur they were dealing with, the same admiral who once attempted to conquer a planet using weaponized poetry. As the chamber emptied, Pipsqueak approached his superior. Sir, should we perhaps conduct further tests on how humans process the compound? Their biology is rather unique. Nonsense. Blur waved a gelatinous appendage dismissively. What's the worst that could happen? It's just grape juice with a bit of alcohol. How resistant could humans possibly be to our most powerful, mind-altering substance? Pipsqueak made a note in his pad to update his resume. Something told him he'd be looking for a new job very soon. Agent Gloop, chief of the Earth infiltration team, was starting to question his life choices. Currently disguised as a human wine critic named Gerald Snootsworth, he stood in the middle of a prestigious Bordeaux vineyard, desperately trying to recall which end of the wine glass he was supposed to drink from. Ah, yes, he proclaimed to his fellow critics, swirling the red liquid in what he hoped was a professional manner. I'm detecting notes of grape, definite grape, and perhaps a hint of more grape. The other critics nodded sagely, jotting down his insights. Gloop made a mental note to thank whoever had programmed the human infiltration protocols to make wine critics sound pretentious. It made blending in so much easier. Meanwhile, in Napa Valley, Agent Splat was having her own crisis. Disguised as a vineyard worker named Barbara, she'd spent 3 hours trying to figure out how to operate a simple grape crusher without arousing suspicion. You just put the grapes in the top? She asked her supervisor for the fifth time. Yes, Barbara, the supervisor sighed. Just like the last 4 times. Are you sure you put previous winemaking experience on your resume? Oh, yes, absolutely. Splat nodded enthusiastically, accidentally detaching her head slightly and having to quickly reattach it. I made tons of wine back in Nebraska. Nebraska? Yes, famous wine region, very prestigious, known for its underwater vineyards. The supervisor stared at her for a long moment before walking away, muttering something about hiring standards really going downhill. Back at the Alien Command Center, which they'd cleverly disguised as a particularly unsuccessful wine bar in Cleveland, Pipsqueak was coordinating the global contamination effort. Status report, he demanded, stress-eating his way through his third pack of space cookies. France is at 60% contamination, Gloop reported, though we had to temporarily suspend operations when Agent Wobble got drunk on the job and tried to marry a grapevine. Italy's at 75%, came Splat's voice. But we lost Agent Squish when he got into an hour-long argument about whether aliens exist with a local farmer. The farmer won. California's complete, another agent chimed in, though we had to explain why our wine critic was trying to drink directly from the fermentation tank. Pipsqueak massaged his temples, or what passed for them in his species. Just finish the job. And someone please tell Agent Bubble that no, he cannot put the mind control compound in beer instead, because wine is too fancy. The contamination continued over the next few weeks with varying degrees of success and an alarming number of alien operatives developing genuine interests in viticulture. Agent Gloop had even started a wine blog, though his reviews consistently mentioned notes of grape as the primary flavor profile. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of pretending to understand wine terminology, the mission was complete. Every major wine-producing region on Earth has been successfully contaminated with the mind control compound. Operation Vintage Disaster, Wine and Dine, is complete, Pipsqueak reported back to Admiral Blur. Though I really think we should reconsider the potential side effects. Excellent, Blur interrupted, his gelatinous form practically vibrating with anticipation. Now we wait for the humans to do what they do best, drink themselves into submission. Sir, about that, our agents have reported some concerning observations about human alcohol consumption patterns. Not now, Pipsqueak. This is my moment of triumph. Nothing can possibly go wrong. Pipsqueak added, update LinkedIn profile to his to-do list, right under Research Witness Protection Programs. The alien observation team huddled around their monitors, watching eagerly as humans across the globe began consuming their contaminated wine. It was New Year's Eve, statistically one of Earth's highest wine consumption dates. Any moment now, Admiral Blur muttered, his gelatinous form practically pressed against the screen. Any moment, they'll all become our willing slaves. 3 hours later, the only thing that had changed was Blur's increasingly agitated shade of purple. Perhaps we should increase magnification, suggested an analyst, adjusting their view screen of a particularly rowdy New Year's party in Sydney. Maybe the mind control is too subtle to see on screen. A group of humans were demonstrating their complete lack of mind control by doing something called the conga while singing off-key. Sir, Pipsqueak ventured nervously, I'm receiving some unusual reports from our field agents. Not now, Blur snapped. I'm trying to detect signs of submission to our will. Yes, but sir, according to Agent Gloop, the humans are showing absolutely no effects. In fact, they seem to be drinking more than usual. His last report mentioned something called a wine fountain at a wedding in Venice. Impossible! Our mind control compound is the most potent in the galaxy. Even the mighty Zorks of Beiju succumbed after a single drop. Sir, another analyst called out, you might want to see this footage from a wine tasting in France. The screen showed their agent, still maintaining his Snootsworth persona, watching in horror as a human sommelier downed an entire bottle of their most concentrated batch, only to declare it a bit young but showing promise. Could use another decade in the cellar. How? Blur's voice modulator cracked. How? Sir, another screen lit up, this one showing a wine festival in Argentina. The humans are mixing our contaminated wine with something they call fruit juice to make something called sangria. They're serving it in buckets. Pipsqueak cleared his throat. Actually, sir, about those biological compatibility tests I wanted to run. Not now, Pipsqueak. We need to increase the dosage. Double it. No, triple it. We already did, sir. 5 times. The only noticeable effect was several humans commenting that the wine had interesting complexity and paired well with cheese. The situation only deteriorated from there. Reports flooded in from across the globe, each more devastating than the last. Humans in Georgia, the country, not the state, were using their enhanced wine for something called toasts and drinking it from actual horns. Wine consumption in Italy had actually increased. They were calling it a particularly good vintage. Sir, a human in California just used their most concentrated batch to make something called mulled wine and served it hot. Admiral Blur's gelatinous form had deflated so much he was practically a puddle. I don't understand. The compound should be affecting their neural pathways, making them susceptible to suggestion. Instead, they're having a great time. Perhaps, suggested an analyst, quickly ducking behind their console as Blur shot them a withering look. Sir, Pipsqueak finally managed to interrupt, waving his datapad frantically. I really think you should see these test results. It appears humans have developed a remarkable tolerance to psychoactive substances, particularly those delivered through alcoholic beverages. In fact, their bodies seem to process our mind control compound the same way they process alcohol, breaking it down into... Into what? Blur demanded. Well, according to these readings, a rather pleasant aftertaste, with notes of blackberry and oak. The command center fell silent, broken only by the sound of humans across the globe, enjoying what they would later declare to be one of the best wine years in recent memory. Sir, one of the analysts ventured, you might want to see this. Someone posted a review of our enhanced wine online. The screen displayed a wine blog post titled 2024's Mystery Vintage, a delightfully mind-bending experience, by none other than Buck Thompson, Earth's most notorious wine critic. Blur began to wonder if it was too late to go back to his original plan with the weaponized poetry. Buck Thompson had tasted some weird wines in his career. There was the infamous Essence of Tire Fire Pinot Noir from Oregon, and that Australian Shiraz that somehow tasted like weaponized potpourri. But this was different. He sat in his tasting room, surrounded by empty bottles from across the globe, his legendary palate trying to make sense of what he was experiencing. His latest video review had been paused mid-recording, the camera catching his puzzled expression as he consulted his notes. Taking another pass at the 2024 Chateau Neural Subjugation, he muttered into his recorder. Notes of blackberry, oak, and attempted mind control. Finishes long, complex, with subtle hints of alien invasion. He frowned, swirling another glass. Either I'm having a stroke or someone's trying to conquer Earth through mediocre winemaking. Meanwhile, across town, Dr. Elena Rodriguez of the Global Wine Authentication Board was having her own crisis. Her lab had been working overtime analyzing samples of what she dubbed the incident vintage. These readings make no sense, she announced to her team, gesturing at the lab results. Every sample shows traces of an unknown compound that seems to... Maria, are you listening to me? Her assistant looked up from where she'd been happily sipping the evidence. Sorry, boss. It's just really good wine. Kind of makes you want to submit to a higher power, you know. Elena snatched the glass away. Stop drinking the evidence. And what do you mean, submit to a higher power? I don't know, Maria shrugged. Just felt like maybe we should all unite under a singular galactic authority. Also, it pairs really well with Gouda. Elena's eyes narrowed. Years of wine authentication experience had taught her to spot even the subtlest signs of tampering, but this was beyond anything she'd seen before. She reached for her phone. Buck, it's Elena. Remember that time you claimed you could taste the winemaker's emotional state in a Bordeaux? I owe you an apology. We've got a situation. Across the globe, others were beginning to notice something was off. A sommelier in Paris reported that a particular vintage was giving him telepathic sommelier powers, though this turned out to be false when he failed to guess what wine his customers were thinking of ordering. A wine bar in Sydney had to be evacuated after patrons began spontaneously organizing into a hive mind, though they mostly used their collective consciousness to argue about pizza toppings. Buck Thompson, now fully convinced he wasn't having a stroke, had assembled a crack team of wine experts in his tasting room. They dubbed themselves the Grape Justice League, much to Elena's disapproval. "Look at this pattern," Elena pointed to a map covered in wine stains and red string. "Every major wine region hit within weeks. This wasn't random." "And check this out," Buck added, pulling up footage from various vineyards. "These new wine critics who showed up just before the contamination began, notice anything odd?" The footage showed various suspicious characters, including one critic who seemed to have trouble maintaining a consistent number of limbs, and another who kept forgetting humans couldn't extend their neck 3 feet to reach the top shelf bottles. "Also," Maria chimed in, having been banned from drinking any more evidence, "has anyone else noticed that every new vineyard worker hired in the past month is named either John Smith or Jane Smith, even the one with tentacles?" Finally, Buck pulled out his pièce de résistance, a wine bottle with a label that read, "Chateau Neural Subjugation, 2024 vintage." "I found this in that weird new wine bar in Cleveland, the one that only opens during lunar eclipses and keeps trying to pay its taxes and space credits." Elena studied the bottle. "That's not a real chateau, and notes of submission to alien overlords isn't a real wine-tasting note." Buck agreed, though I have to admit it does have excellent structure. "So what you're saying," Maria summarized, "is that aliens have infiltrated Earth's wine industry in an apparent attempt at mind control, but failed because they didn't account for humanity's legendary alcohol tolerance?" "Exactly," Buck exclaimed. "Also, they're terrible at winemaking. I mean, look at these tasting notes from Agent Snootsworth. Contains grape. That's it. That's his entire review." Elena began gathering her papers. "We need to alert the authorities. The real question is, who do you call when aliens spike the planet's wine supply?" "I have an idea," Buck grinned, pulling out his phone. "Remember my cousin Jack, the one who became a diplomat after that incident with the tequila and the Norwegian cruise ship? I think it's time for an intergalactic wine tasting." Ambassador Jack Martinez stood before the Galactic Council, armed with nothing but a briefcase full of Earth's finest spirits and the kind of confidence that comes from having survived both diplomatic school and his uncle's moonshine. "Distinguished members of the council," he began, trying not to stare at Admiral Blur, who had stress-jiggled himself into more of an anxiety puddle than his usual gelatinous form. "We need to talk about your recent addition to our wine industry." High Counselor Zix's antennae twitched nervously. "We have no idea what you're talking about, human. Perhaps you've had too much of your fermented grape juice." "Oh, you mean this fermented grape juice?" Jack placed a bottle on the podium. 2024 Chateau Neural Subjugation. I must say, the mind control notes really bring out the tannins." A horrified gasp echoed through the chamber. Pipsqueak tried to hide behind his datapad, which was difficult considering the pad was smaller than he was. How did you know?" Blur finally managed, reforming enough to speak. "Well, first of all, your wine critics need better cover stories. Nobody believed Nebraska was famous for its underwater vineyards, but mainly," Jack grinned, "you made one crucial mistake. You assumed wine was the strongest thing humans drink." He opened his briefcase, pulling out a series of bottles. "Allow me to introduce you to some other Earth beverages. This is vodka, essentially potato juice that wants to fight you. This is tequila, which has been known to make humans think they can communicate with dolphins. And this," he held up a mason jar of clear liquid, "is my uncle's moonshine. We use it to clean engine parts when we run out of actual cleaning supplies." The council leaned forward simultaneously, fascinated and horrified. You drink these voluntarily?" Pipsqueak asked, scribbling notes frantically. "Oh, that's just the beginning," Jack continued, warming to his subject. "We have drinks made from fermented honey, fermented rice, fermented agave. Basically, if it contains sugar, somewhere in history a human has tried to ferment it. We once accidentally discovered mead because we left honey out too long and decided to drink it anyway." But our mind control compound, Blur protested weakly, is basically a light cocktail mixer compared to what we're used to. I mean, have you heard of absinthe? It's literally called the green fairy because it makes you see things. We drink it for fun. The council members were now passing around the bottles, examining them with a mixture of terror and admiration. Are you saying, High Counselor Zix ventured, that humans regularly consume substances stronger than our most potent mind-altering compounds for entertainment? Well, not just entertainment, Jack clarified. Sometimes we do it to win bets, or because it's Tuesday, or because someone said, "What's the worst that could happen?" Which coincidentally is probably what you said before launching this whole wine scheme, right? Blur's color shifted to a deeply embarrassed mauve. Perhaps we underestimated human resilience. Jack raised an eyebrow. Your mind control wine barely registers compared to what we call bottom shelf vodka. We have drinks that are literally flammable. We invented something called a four horsemen. That's just 4 different types of whiskey in one glass. We have beers so strong it's illegal in some countries. He paused, noting the mixture of horror and intrigue on the alien faces. But you know what the really interesting thing is? Your compound actually improved some of our wines. Buck Thompson, he's our top wine critic, says it added fascinating complexity to several vintages. We're thinking of marketing it as a premium feature. You want to sell it? Pipsqueak's jaw dropped, which in his species meant it literally fell off and had to be reattached. Of course, though we'll need to work out licensing fees, distribution rights, that sort of thing. After all, you did try to conquer our planet. The least you could do is let us profit from the attempt. The council chamber erupted in excited chittering as the implications sank in. Several members were already calculating potential profit margins, while others were cautiously sniffing the bottles Jack had brought. So Jack smiled diplomatically. Shall we discuss terms? I suggest we do it over drinks. I brought enough glasses for everyone. Blur looked at the bottles, then at his failed invasion plan, then back at the bottles. You know what? Pour me a double. 1 year later, the first annual Intergalactic Wine and Spirits Festival was in full swing, transforming the Galactic Council headquarters into what could only be described as the universe's most ambitious cocktail party. Admiral Blur, now head of intergalactic beverage relations, and significantly more relaxed after discovering martinis, hovered near the Earth booth where Buck Thompson was conducting a wine tasting. Now notice the subtle mind-bending qualities, Buck explained to a group of fascinated aliens. We've refined the original invasion compound into what we call our conspiracy theory line. Each bottle makes you believe in a different outlandish theory. This red blend, for instance, convinces you that Earth's moon is actually a giant space egg. Remarkable! Exclaimed a multi-eyed being, tentacles wrapped wheeled around a wine glass. And humans drink this knowing it will alter their perceptions? Please, Buck scoffed. We once invented a drink that makes you think you can dance. This is nothing. Nearby, Pipsqueak, now running a surprisingly successful consulting firm specializing in xenochemical mixology, announced proudly, with our psychoactive compounds, we've created an entirely new category of spirits. We call it quantum liquor. Each bottle exists in multiple states of intoxication simultaneously until you observe its effects. Fascinating, Elena Rodriguez nodded, taking notes. Though we might need to add a warning label about potential temporary dimension hopping. At the diplomatic reception area, Ambassador Jack Martinez was teaching High Counselor Zix how to make cocktails, a task made more interesting by her insistence on mixing them with all 6 appendages simultaneously. The key to a good Manhattan, Jack explained, dodging a particularly enthusiastic shake, is to pretend you know what you're doing even when you absolutely don't, which, coincidentally, is also the key to most diplomatic relations. Zix clicked thoughtfully. When we first discovered Earth, we thought you were a primitive species because you willingly consumed poison for pleasure. Now I realize that's what makes humans fascinating. You take things that should destroy you and turn them into art. That, and we're really, really good at building up tolerances to things that probably should have killed us, Jack agreed. You should see what happens when you tell humans something's impossible. We take it as a personal challenge. Meanwhile, Agent Gloop, who had decided to maintain his Gerald Snootsworth persona and was now a legitimate wine critic, was judging the experimental wine category. Ah, yes, he declared, swirling a glass of something that glowed in the dark. I'm detecting notes of grape, but also temporal displacement, and possibly a violation of several laws of physics. Excellent vintage. The festival had become the hottest ticket in the galaxy. Beings from across the universe came to sample Earth's beverages, each race discovering their own favorite. The Zorians developed a taste for craft beer, the Quantum Collective became oddly fascinated with boxed wine, and the silicon-based life forms found they could get surprisingly tipsy on mineral water. In his private office, now decorated with both his failed invasion plans and an impressive wine collection, Admiral Blur raised a glass with Jack. You know, Blur admitted, his gelatinous form now permanently tinted a relaxed shade of rose from regular wine consumption. This turned out much better than an invasion would have. Do you realize Earth's beverage exports now account for 30% of all galactic trade? Not bad for a species you thought you could conquer with spiked wine. Jack grinned. Though I'm still not sure how you didn't notice all our other alcoholic beverages during your surveillance. We thought they were industrial cleaning products. Blur confessed, especially something called Jägermeister. To be fair, we're still not entirely sure it isn't, Jack laughed. To failed invasions and successful drinks. To humanity. The species that looked at deadly toxins and thought, I bet we could make this fun. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear Pipsqueak frantically yelling something about someone mixing quantum liquor with moonshine, followed by the distinctive sound of someone briefly existing in 3 dimensions simultaneously. Just another normal day in humanity's newest industry, intergalactic bartending.